Hi, everybody. This is Vanessa at Menolabs, and I am really excited because today we have with us Dr. Arianna Sholes-Douglas. She is an MD specializing in integrative women's health, among many other things. She has dedicated much of her career to menopause and perimenopause and helping women understand that transition. And she is also the author of a best-selling book on menopause. It is called The Menopause Myth: What Your Mother, Friends, and Doctors Won't Tell You About Turning 35. And I think I might have butchered that title a little bit,
Okay,
but
close enough.
it's such a good read. So if you haven't read this, I highly recommend it. Dr. Arianna has really been kind, and I am so glad that she is here to talk to us a little bit about some of the questions you've been asking on our social media channels about headaches and periods and a couple of other things that seem to come up over and over and over when it comes to perimenopause and menopause. So, Dr. Arianna, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So I just want to get the title of your book correct. It is The Menopause Myth: What Your Mother, Doctor, and Friends Haven't Shared About Life After 35.
Correct. Yes.
And it was such a good read. You know, I spend all day, I must say the word menopause like 50, 60 times a day. So, you know, it's getting to be second nature for me. And this book made me cry because especially when you talked about how, you know, the brain fog is not Alzheimer's. It is just something that happens, and no, you're not losing your mind, you're not going crazy, because I have to tell you, that's been one of the things that has been really on my mind lately, as I try to navigate being the owner of a company and all of that stuff, and also navigating perimenopause. So let's just jump right in because you have a wealth of information. So I want to talk. I think the first question I want to talk about is skipping periods in menopause. And is that normal? And how much is normal? And when should we talk to a doctor? If we could start there, that would be a great help to our community.
Sure. Well, again, thanks for having me. And the whole skipping periods is really one of the hallmarks of perimenopause. That's when we know that our hormones are starting to fluctuate. So starting to skip a cycle, maybe they're a little longer, maybe they're a little shorter, or maybe they're a little lighter, maybe they're a little heavier or a lot heavier. Your cycles can change in any sort of way. So it's extremely common. And once you start seeing those changes, especially if you're in your late 30s, early 40s, you can be pretty much assured that's like one of the telltale signs that you're at least beginning your journey.
And would you say, because I had a 3-week period, and that was my clue that something was not normal. Would you say that there are often really large indicators like that, or for most women is it more I guess less of a variation?
Yeah, every woman is so different. Literally, some women are going to start to have very, very heavy cycles to the point where they consider a hysterectomy, a surgical procedure, or uterine ablation, which is a very common procedure that's performed, in a woman's late 30s and 40s, because, and that procedure is where we basically, for lack of a better way to describe it, kind of burn the inside of the uterine cavity so that there's no more ability for the lining to expand and shed, because your cycles are really just the shedding of that endometrial lining. That lining builds because of the estrogen impact, and then you shed and have a period because of the progesterone impact. And when you're entering perimenopause and you're not ovulating, then that's typically when you're going to start to see the changes, because with ovulation, you make progesterone. And so when you don't ovulate, you don't make progesterone. So you basically build the lining up. And then your periods are really not true periods in the sense that you ovulated and you're cycling 14 days after. Your periods are really just a random shed of the lining. So for some women, like I said, they just have heavy cycles, or they don't have any cycles, or they skip cycles. And so they're thinking of their cycles in the normal kind of 28-day pattern. But once you're not ovulating, or you are ovulating erratically, then you're not going to have the same cycles.
That is just fascinating. I got to tell you, I have learned so much about women's bodies and my own body. So another thing that I've noticed is headaches. And a lot of folks in our comment sections are asking about headaches. Is it common to have frequent headaches? Do migraines become an issue in perimenopause? And I think that there's some truth to the headache stuff that we're experiencing, but it's maybe more nutrition based than women realize. Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I think migraines, headaches, those are all more common in perimenopause and menopause. And again, it has everything to do with the kind of predominance of different hormones, so estrogen in particular. So just like with PMS, you may have headaches and you may get migraines around those time periods. I mean, it's pretty much the same physiology that's happening. So it is more common, but it also can be exacerbated with food. And that's, again, another thing that women have to really start to pay attention to. Their diet is huge, and things that you may not have been as sensitive to before, you are definitely more sensitive to. So there's certain foods that can definitely be triggers. So for every patient that I see that has headaches, whether they're perimenopausal or not, I always put them on what's called a food elimination diet, which removes gluten, dairy, sugar, soy, alcohol, corn, and some of the things that are real triggers. And you'd be surprised what becomes a trigger for you as you age, right? Things that you could eat before were fine, and then you can't. Like, I used to be able to eat Popeye's chicken. They have a seasoning in there, but now I can't eat it because that seasoning literally gives me a headache. And I don't know if it's perimenopause or not. I just know that if I eat Popeye's chicken, red beans and rice, there's something in there now that I will literally get a migraine. And it's very disturbing because I love the red beans and rice.
Oh, I love Popeye's chicken. I hope that's not a thing that's gonna happen to me. Right? I'm telling you, Popeye's chicken is one of my favorites. Okay, so I just want to digress from the questions that folks were asking to say that in your book you do have like a section toward the very end that's like, get your fundamentals together. I would love to touch on that. Just a little bit about what those fundamentals are and what women need to be doing because you talked about this elimination diet, and maybe you eliminate these things. Can you put them back in your diet? What other things should you be doing that are fundamental to get your health in order?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of food elimination. It changed my life when I realized that tomatoes, actually, I was very, very sensitive to, and tomatoes are considered nightshades. So I learned after doing the food elimination diet, actually the doctor put me on it, and I was like, okay, all that made sense except for the tomatoes. So I was like, that's stupid. It's a tomato. What's wrong? It's like, it's healthy. It's a fruit or a vegetable, whatever you want to call it. And at the time I lived back east, and I had a garden of tomatoes. So I was loving my tomatoes. So that was the first thing I reintroduced back in. So the concept is that you remove the foods for at least 21, preferably 28 days. And that gives your body a chance to kind of reset. And then you bring back each food individually. So I always tell patients, bring back what you like the most. For me, it was the tomatoes, because I was like, I'm going to start eating my tomato sandwiches again, or my tomato salads. So that was the first thing I brought back. And when I did the food elimination, and I will say also that I prescribed it for lots of menopausal women, perimenopausal women, and it's been just that diet alone has really helped them just, I would say, skate through, but really alleviated so many of their issues. And they've had to learn, like, okay, these foods are really bothering me more than others. But for me, I took I added tomatoes back, and then the next day I literally felt like every joint I could feel every joint in my body. I had a headache. I was fatigued. I couldn't think straight. And I was like, no, not the tomatoes. But you never know because, it's not like you eat the food and then all of a sudden you feel badly. It's you eat the food and it can be 24, 48 hours later that you're really manifesting symptoms, and people don't connect tomatoes to, the headache that you had the next morning. They
Right.
just figure I woke up with a headache. And who would do that? But unless you are very, very specific about taking the food and introducing. So I recommend that they take these foods out and then slowly bring them back to just kind of see, if nothing else, you'll really learn how different foods affect how you're feeling, your energy, your cognition. I mean, it's huge. So I don't normally ask or do anything before we look at food. And people who aren't really willing to do that, I mean, there's other things that could be helpful: magnesium, chase tree, um, um, DIM as a supplement. So there are things that can also help in the metabolism of hormones. But if you're not really dealing with, the toxic effect of certain things, then you're only getting half, if that much.
So you're saying that your joint pain may have been caused by tomatoes?
No doubt, not may have. It was, yeah,
Wow.
it's a known, tomatoes and nightshades. I mean, and I have an autoimmune condition. So I have both Hashimoto's and lupus. So I mean, I'm more sensitive in general to that, but there are people who are just like, if you have a lot of joint pain, I tell everybody, first and foremost, take out nightshades, take out gluten and dairy, take out the inflammatory foods, because that's what your pain is basically inflammation. And so we're sensitive to certain things. And so um, tomatoes for me was a huge one. And again, I love them. I make spaghetti all the time. I love pasta. I mean, it was like, so now I have gluten-free pasta. And I make the spaghetti sauce because my family still really likes it. And I really like it, but I may put like just a tablespoon on some gluten-free, so I at least feel like I have something. But I can't eat them like I don't eat them like I used to eat them before.
That's actually one of the questions that keeps coming up. How common is joint pain when you're in perimenopause and menopause? And there are probably other things that are causing joint pain that
Yes.
are in your diet, and maybe just your hormone regulation and just might not be as normal, quote unquote, as it was in your 20s.
Yeah, and so joint pain, interestingly enough, in a recent study, they looked at the most common symptoms that women reported as during their perimenopause and menopause years, and joint pain actually was higher than hot flashes. So it's a very common symptom that people really weren't so aware of. I actually really, it's really been very recent that I've been like, yeah, I guess, I mean, some people just chalk it up to something else. They're not really talking about, they don't even associate it. So we don't even have the conversation. But after I read this study, I was like, wow, like I have to look for it more and listen for it more. Cause it's on the list of potential symptoms, but it actually is really a thing. It's a thing.
Right. Well, and I think a lot of women are clued into the fact that they're in perimenopause with the hot flash episode, right? When you have a hot flash, you're like, oh yeah, that's menopause. But we don't think of all of these other things. Like in your book, you talked about mood swings, and how you didn't, even as a doctor who's been practicing for 30 years, didn't make the connection right away. Do you want to talk a little bit about your personal experience and what you drove you to write this book and focus on this subject?
Yeah, sure. I've been very transparent about it. And so it was kind of like a rude awakening for me because, again, I'm an OBGYN and I was in my mid 40s until I realized, like, oh, I've been going through perimenopause all this time. And it was years, and I really was absolutely clueless. Now, to my defense, I was practicing high risk OB and I really wasn't practicing gynecology. So I wasn't as in tune with gynecology as I am now. But still, I'm still an OBGYN and still I never got trained. Most doctors are not trained in this subject at all. There's been a whole generation of doctors that really don't, they're clueless. And I'm not saying that in a mean way. It's just literally all we learned was there's menopause and women get hot flashes and estrogen is helpful. That's it.
Right.
Like,
Right.
there's no other conversation. There's no conversation about vaginal dryness or, you know, the mood swings or the depression or the anxiety. So, I mean, I just had a lot of stuff going on in my life in general. I had moved my family essentially cross country from one job to another. I was doing high risk OB. I was in my late, oh, I'm like, wait, it's like, how old am I? What am I doing here? I was in my late 40s. That's not making sense to me now. I'm like, okay, I'm going to be 55 next month. And I've been here 14 years. So yeah, I was in my 40s. Anyway, sorry. I can't believe I'm like, wow, was it that long ago? So I was in my early 40s when I moved here, and I was just a hot mess. And I started just feeling depressed. I mean, and I knew a lot of it had to do with just the circumstances because of the work I was doing, and I was just wasn't happy with my job, and I didn't know. I just knew I was felt like I was going crazy, and I knew also that things were going badly because my husband, who you know at that point I think we had been married, I don't know, maybe 6, 7 years. Um, you know, we had a decent relationship, pretty good, and but I was just like, I literally hate him. And I was feeling like this something is wrong. Like I shouldn't, like I literally thought about poisoning him, which I write about in the book, or like what that would look like. And it just took me getting to that point of like, maybe it's me. Like, because he hadn't even done anything. Some days he does things and I'm like, ugh. But this particular moment, I was like, he didn't do anything. I hate him. I hate my kids. I was just miserable. And so not being able to do my job to my full capacity because I just had so much brain fog, my hair was falling out. I just was clueless. And I slowly, eventually figured out, okay, it was my thyroid, went to several doctors. Even myself looking at my thyroid labs, I'm trained, at that point I only had really a conventional medicine understanding of how the thyroid works. So it's literally took me years of personal experience and dealing with this to realize, wow, this is a thing. So this is why it's like such a big part of my practice now. It's like, I would say at least 10 to 20% of my patients I've diagnosed with Hashimoto's. And that's because no one else is screening them for it. It's just, but it's so common of a autoimmune disorder. And I'm finding it in loads and loads of women. So there's an overlap of symptoms, right? So you could be perimenopausal, but you also might be hypothyroid. And you may also, I mean, if you have some underlying depression and anxiety, it's a very good chance that these things are going to really be exacerbated around this time. So for me, it was just a perfect storm of all the little things that were already happening. And I just eventually, like I said, put the pieces of the puzzle together. And then once I realized, I was like, wow, like if I don't understand this, then I'm an OBGYN. Obviously, I don't do it every single day at that point, but how does the average woman deal with this? Because it's illogical to me. And then as I just started really interviewing patients and talking to more women and my friends, and they're like, well, what do you think about menopause? And it was just like this big mystery and nobody had any answers. And then I would hear from other patients what other doctors were telling them. And I was like, wow, like I almost felt like I was in a twilight zone. Like, I can't believe this is something so significant that people don't understand and they're so unprepared for it. So that is what really inspired me to write it, because again, I figure if I didn't understand it, then odds are most people don't understand it.
Yeah, and that is absolutely the case. It's what I find when I talk to women every single day. We don't know what's happening. We don't know why it's happening. All we know is it's really messing up our lives, right?
Yes, and ignorance is not bliss.
No, it is really not. It's really
Mm-mm.
not. So there have been a lot of questions in our comments section about hot flashes because, as I said, I think that's the thing that clues most women in to the fact that this is the stage of life that they're in now. And we get a lot of questions about, I have 20 or 30 hot flashes a day. Is this normal? I go to bed and I sweat through 3 different pairs of pajamas. Is this normal? Can you,
Yeah.
I mean, we always say every woman is different, and that absolutely is the case. But can you talk a little bit about hot flashes and anything that would indicate that a woman should see her doctor when it comes to hot flashes?
Yeah, so I would say it's probably not normal to have 20 hot flashes a day. I mean, it can certainly happen, but that's not, I would say, the average experience that people have. But there are women who are just really just a hot mess, again, for lack of a better term. And then the night sweats, the same situation. But one thing that I do know, patients that are dealing with that, one thing we have to look at in those cases is going to be their gut and their sugar intake, because I've had patients that have had that, but again, going back to the food elimination diet, removing sugar and alcohol at night is a big one. So a lot of women, we're used to, having that glass of wine before you go to bed, or that cocktail, and that's pretty much like asking for a hot flash at night. So I realized early on, thankfully, that I couldn't drink wine without having a hot flash, but I could drink vodka. So there's certain liquors, and I don't know if it had to do with the sugar content. I imagine it did. But I could drink certain alcohols, but other ones would definitely, it would disrupt my sleep. I just couldn't do it. Or if I had dessert at night and some wine, it was a wrap. Like I was going to be up, I was going to be flashing, and I just be ready. But I would say if you're having that significant, you have to look at your diet. I think there's definitely an impact that your diet can make if you make some adjustments, and looking at your sugar and alcohol are huge.
And caffeine is a big one for me. If
Mm-hmm. Everybody, and sometimes it's spicy foods. Some people, because once that trigger, it's almost like once that thing triggers, it just kind of stays until it's ready to go away. But sugar for sure is high on the list, and caffeine can be too. And it can definitely, again, disrupt sleep a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing that maybe impacts our sleep is anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a lot of women talking about anxiety issues as their hormones start to fluctuate more. And a couple of folks have even mentioned that they've had hives associated with their anxiety.
Yeah.
And they wonder if it's caused by perimenopause and menopause specifically. I don't know if it's maybe got more to do with food or something like that, but
yeah, it can be complex. I mean, it could be associated with what it is that gave you the hot flash or the anxiety in the first place, and foods can definitely trigger that. So you can't take that out of the equation. And it can also, and that's the problem, is that there's not enough research out there. There's really not enough data. We're just starting to realize there's another study that came out last year looking at the frequency of hot flashes and night sweats, and how that really is a marker for diminished cardiovascular health, and this association for women who continue to have hot flashes even into the postmenopausal period. So they don't know why, but there's so much that we don't understand. The hives are always a tricky thing. I mean, any anxiety at the end of the day, just the nature of how it affects our body can bring on hives. Hives is really more of like an allergic like a reaction that we're having. And that's the thing about menopause, is that some of the symptoms are just like I have some women, they only get like hot flashes around their vagina. Like they don't get it in their whole body. They only get it there. And it's like, that's different. It happens. And I looked it up and was like, yeah, that's a thing. But it's not a common thing. So I would say the issue with anxiety, kind of going back to that though, is that if you have some underlying anxiety going into this, then you can be pretty rest assured it's going to ramp up, right? So oftentimes, I see women that have had a kind of a long-standing history of it. It's kind of been very manageable, and then by perimenopause, it's just no longer manageable. They're just too symptomatic. So they're having palpitations. They can't sleep. It's like having PMS like all the time, basically. And
well, it's interesting you say that whatever you've got as an underlying issue seems to be exacerbated in perimenopause and menopause, because I've definitely found that with my allergies. My allergies have become so much worse over the last 4 years or so. And it's definitely related to my perimenopause journey.
Yeah. So, and the anxiety, the same. I mean, I didn't really have a lot of anxiety going into perimenopause, but towards the end, I noticed I had way more anxiety than I would have expected. And it was odd to me because again, that just wasn't my experience. I just didn't suffer from that. But the anxiety of just, and it would almost come at the same time every day, like in the evening after work. And I don't know, maybe it was just making that transition from, work to going home, but I just would feel like a sense of unrest and still get those symptoms. And that's the thing, is that there's so many weird things. You don't know, like today, is it because why? Our bodies are so complex. So I don't pretend to understand all the symptoms and why we get them, but I do know that they're very real. And whether or not they're caused by perimenopause or whether they're just worse during that period doesn't really matter. It's a reality that we have to deal with.
Yes, it is. And it's something that women like Dr. Arianna and Danielle and myself are really trying to change the conversation around. And so I encourage all of our viewers today to absolutely go into your life, talk about your menopause symptoms, not just with your healthcare provider, definitely with your healthcare provider, but also with your friends, with your family, with your coworkers, with your boss. If we want to change the conversation around menopause, it has to start with us. And we need to be open and honest about what's happening to us so that the rest of the world can come along on this journey with us, because we shouldn't go through this by ourselves. Dr. Arianna, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. Dr. Arianna is going to come back and answer some more questions for us. So if you have questions that you would like Dr. Arianna to address in the next time she talks with us, please leave them in the comments. Let us know what you want to hear about, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dr. Arianna. And if you don't have her book, please go get it. Bye-bye.